nice to see you again on this beautiful day. This time with three quotes from Michel de Montaigne, a 16th century philosopher, which is very based. First, the only thing certain is nothing is certain. I prefer the company of peasants because they haven't been educated sufficiently to reason incorrectly. Third, nothing is so firmly believed as that we
Beautiful quotes, man. This is such an important pointer for us as this Dunning-Kruger effect inside of our minds, all around us, is ever present and so tempting. And he's pointing us toward an intention of not trying to be right, but trying to be less wrong. And a pointer that our blind spots can totally consume or cover up our best judgment. And it especially can be tempting or blinding when it is stuff that we are super left-brained about, which is a part of what I think he's pointing to with the sufficiently educated to reason incorrectly, is this conditioning that we have to, when we interact with others, we communicate, we use language. Language puts one word in front of another, in front of another, in front of another, and these left brain maps of what is going on in the logic of things can totally blind us to the territory, can totally blind us to the right-brained, greater full context reality, the nuance of things, and the instead logical arguments of trying to superimpose labels over the world that can blind us to more embodied, nuanced, balanced decision making and reasoning that can't necessarily be fully transcribed into an argument. And the desire to be less wrong, the recognition that nothing is certain. This is something that if I look back and I see my greatest strategic errors through the years, most of the time, I did not have this mindset of trying to be less wrong. I did not have this recognition that I feel very certain about this. Let me be cautious. Let me inspect my blind spots. Let me recognize that the more intensely I feel about this, the more information I may in fact be lacking about it. And these are lessons that I have very much learned the hard way. Very much learned the hard way. And
Not only you, not only you.
how do you think about this trying to be less wrong and the temptation and the conditioning of certainty that can arise in our communication, in our education, in our conditioning?
Well, oftentimes we just go into the world and have our experiences and then draw our conclusions from it and then think we can map these conclusions and project these conclusions on any other situation which seems similar but maybe is not. So we try to learn and try to gain knowledge, sometimes with the mindset of, okay, I probably know now how it works. But every time we act from this mindset of, okay, I'm sure that this is the way. And probably we have had experiences back in our life where we have failed miserably because we expected something and acted according to our expectations, but then reality hits differently. Reality hit us hard and then it is painful because, yeah, when our expectations do not match reality because of our models, because of our conviction that we are right, then it's even more painful. So it is a steering mechanism, maybe a control system to try to be less wrong that really much helps us to look for the space of possibilities which we haven't looked so far at, to look for our blind spots actively and to acknowledge that we very much have many blind spots and nobody does not have any blind spots. So this is a thing we have to remind ourselves very often, that we know nothing whatsoever about the future, how it will evolve for us. But we can deal with the uncertainty we face. And yeah, there are different strategies to deal with uncertainty. And I believe it's more important not what you know, but how to deal with what you not know. Because
Hmm.
then you can steer the ship effectively towards a solution which matches a dynamically changing world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it points to one, thinking in terms of probabilities rather than black and white. Not a black and white, if I do this, then this thing will happen in this complex environment. It's more of, yeah, based off of what I can see, recognizing that there's many aspects of this that I can't see, based off of how deeply I've inspected these blind spots, based off of who I've sought advice from about the situation, based off of how many similar situations I've seen and how consistently they play out versus my predictions versus how much they're influenced by outside factors that can't be known in advance. We can assign some degree of probability to something that will be right, recognizing that we don't know. We don't ever know how the future will play out. And this probabilistic thinking is likely to inspire a look at one, asymmetric bets. How do we open ourselves up to the upside while totally capping the downside? How can we have an MVP that we test and rent before we buy on these very many things so that we can see what the actual results are, not just assume that we're imagining and forecasting it right, but in fact run an experiment. And then once we see the result of the experiment, then we invest heavily in this thing, or then we put a lot at stake on this thing after we've seen how it stacks up and fleshes out a little bit in the real world. The other aspect of blind spots that I think is really important as leaders and decision makers, strategists making complex decisions when we're still learning. We might not have decades of experience, but we still want to be less wrong as we're making decisions, is actively seeking out our blind spots being pointed out with pretty much all of our most important decisions, all of the most complex decisions, and certainly all of the decisions that are important and we sense that we have strong feelings about them or involved in them one way or another. These feelings can really blind us or cause our, more so than blind us, they cause our left brain to confabulate stories to support the things that we feel emotionally. And this can lead to motivated reasoning that can steer us in a place where we're actually making mistakes that we feel a very high degree of conviction about. And so to find these blind spots, what I think is important is one, for important decisions, not all decisions are so important that you need to take them so seriously and spend so much effort on them. But for the ones that are, I would say one, mentors are extremely valuable for blind spots. These are people that have walked the path further, that have seen these situations play out. They have seen other people make many decisions from the outside. They've learned from their own mistakes, especially wise and self aware mentors. Are people that you can tell the situation, this side, this movement, this momentum, this context, this thing, and ask them, what might I not be seeing? What might I not be pricing incorrectly? How might I be wrong in this situation? And seeking to disprove our hypotheses. So, not, I feel strongly about this, I want to be right, I'm going to try to be right, I'm going to seek information with confirmation bias, but actually seeking to disprove, or what might I be missing about this? And then the other one, along with mentors, believe it or not, AI tools are really good at pointing out blind spots now and suggesting the stones that we might unturn, the reasons that we might be wrong. They're great brainstormers, and so they can be really good at this. My question for you is the educated sufficiently to reason incorrectly. In what ways are we conditioned or educated to reason incorrectly? How does this come up?
How I see it is, the more we dive into a topic, into a field of study, for example, we narrow our mind towards seeing the world through the lens of this field of study. An engineer thinks differently to a social scientist, to an economist, to someone who works with hands, thinks differently to a farmer. And not to say that there's a status hierarchy, but any kind of work which is doable, any kind of field could be valuable in some sense. But the way you educate yourself and only source from one field of study narrows your mind and narrows the lenses you have which you see the world through. And this sometimes leads to overly believing what you think, to overly believing your version of the way to look at things which are happening in reality, maybe. The
I have an
economist.
example of that, actually. I was in college, I studied finance. In my first two businesses, when I was in college and then right after college, I succeeded at them with a very finance forward toolkit. This was the tool that these couple of turnarounds really needed. And this was the thing that I was really good at, that I understood really well, or whatever. And so I used this finance methodology, framework, way of looking at things, way of solving problems on these things, and it worked really well. And then I got to this next business that I was looking at, and I only applied this framework to it. I didn't understand operations, I didn't understand customer service and sales, but yet I knew how to analyze this thing on a spreadsheet. And so I looked at it through this lens. And I, in hindsight, was so blind to so much signal that was coming in about these red flags that showed up in other places. But because I was used to applying this framework, and I had this story about how this framework is the sort of the thing that cuts through so much of the noise, I was blind to so much other signal that I would have seen had I really honored these other lenses of looking at these things, these other modes of expertise. I was too narrow in my view about it. And it was a really costly mistake that cost me a lot of difficulty and pain for a while. Yeah. So I relate to this.
Great example, man. And this is also what you pointed towards. You pointed towards mentors as a real good source of widening the idea space of how to approach or tackle problems or challenges. And you also pointed towards tools like AI tools. What I would add to that is teams,
Hmm.
like people who have their unique strength and give them into the mix of mapping the world so that when you actually look at the same thing but with different eyes and different minds, with different narrowness, I would say, with different kinds of education or with different kinds of conviction, then when you add that all together, you will not only see the world in black and white, but you will start to see the world in color and see it brighter. Maybe you will see pitfalls you can circumnavigate through different decision making. And you can also add the mentor part of that into the mix of a team in terms of the people who walk the path definitely have a higher believability than the people who just thought about it or just read
Hmm.
about it. So this is a way to see the world in colors. Therefore, peasants haven't been educated sufficiently to reason incorrectly. So they don't have the narrow tool set they have been educated with. And maybe education also is influenced by different forces, depending on what kind of fields of studies the government is funding more, then the positions go more. So that also the education drifts towards a bias, maybe. So the more you have the structured education, the narrower the mind will be. But if you put in the mix some autodidacts, the people who followed their own interests and try to only learn what they were curious about, then they made themselves really productive. Then they made themselves like their uniqueness. They grown up and evolved their unique style of thinking and reasoning through the world, which is not really motivated reasoning, which is the worst kind of reasoning because you try to prove a point
Hmm.
and try to find information which just proves your point instead of trying to be less wrong about what there really is. So with a team, in my opinion, you will see the world and reality more likely how it presents itself than alone with your narrow mind of education. Because, yeah, you are motivated to survive and then you will reason your way through it. But better reason your way through it with multiple people. And now AI can be these multiple people as well. You can put AI in a role
Yeah.
of, let's say, a financier, an engineer, or like an entrepreneur, or whatever. And then go for it. Just get these different kind of viewpoints, and then you will see from different perspectives onto the problem.
And so much of this does hinge on our relationship with our ego, in my opinion. In order to recognize that I don't know, in order to say I don't have all the information, I am not certain. And what are my blind spots? I'm recognizing that there's much I don't know. My intention is not to trust that this thing that sounds great to me is the ultimate almighty thing, and I just have to find some evidence for what I know to be true. In fact, I'm looking for evidence that I'm wrong. I'm recognizing that other people see things that I don't. I'm recognizing that my information is incomplete and my learning is incomplete, and I may be deceived by my own emotions. So much of this hinges on our ability to have bendiness and not to be so rigid in our identity about I am me, I have this opinion, I am very smart, I am an expert in things, but rather to recognize that I know nothing. And only by seeing that our view is limited, our knowledge is limited, our capacity for perfect reasoning and perfect information is limited, we can then, from that starting point, open ourselves to receiving really useful information, to receiving something that's telling us that we might be going down a bad path and then change according to it. And so much of our capacity for all this does hinge on our relationship with our identity around making decisions or being so smart or whatever. The other aspect of this with the left brain thinking, with the map versus the territory, is that things change. We might have had a good plan early on, and now we must hold this in our palm and honor and put our force into it. However, hold it very loosely, which is a tricky balance to strike. We do need to apply our full life force to our plans, and we do need to fully commit and dive in, not go down 10 different paths at once. However, there's this saying that the Marines have about plans and going into reality, which is terrain and circumstances dictate. We must be
Mhm.
receptive to new information along the way and realize that we might have had a great plan at the beginning, and now we have received new information. And so, this narrative that I have about this is what I'm doing and why, yes, sometimes we need to have some narrative to tell ourselves and others what we are doing and why and what we're applying our thing toward and what is the vision, of course. But we should try to hold these things loosely, especially in a dynamic environment. Terrain and circumstances dictate. We might see new information that tells us we need to change course. And if we're trying to just grip on to the thing that we thought was right 3 months ago, then we can really blind ourselves. And this consistency bias can, in fact, really get in the way of good flexibility and wise decision making in a dynamic environment. And so, this is the other aspect that, yes, we should find out early on. We should look to see why we are wrong early on. And then, even along the way, we must apply our full life force to what we're doing. Of course, we must pick a plan and go with it. We don't want to just sit at the starting line and do nothing, for sure. However, even when we are in motion, let us be flexible. Even when we are in motion, let us continue to search for blind spots. Even when we are in motion, let's find new information and receive it about what does this change about my course that I should incorporate or make adjustments about. Terrain and circumstances can be vastly different than what we expect or even arise in ways that we weren't even considering as possible options on the map.
Definitely in a dynamic environment where chaos reigns, then this is very true. And then the agile mindset also shows how many options you will have when you take in these information. Agile means like having an adaptable character, and therefore the firefighters also have this kind of challenge of trying to dealing with chaos. So they divide and conquer. So they have this simple heuristic of look around, then think, and then act. And then again, look around and then think and then act. Don't act something and then think about it and then look
Hmm.
around and then
Yeah.
see, oh, you run into the totally wrong direction. So it points also towards that agility of your mind is very important. And you mentioned the ego beforehand, and the Dunning-Kruger effect, where Michel de Montaigne pointed out nothing is so firmly believed as that
Hmm.
which we least know. And probably most of the time it is like our rigid identity, which we crafted through our long time of being educated in the system and crafted our identity which we hold on so firmly, and now trying to prove the point to a person which knows less than us, and
Hmm.
therefore this sometimes may work but many times will definitely not work, because this effect, I guess, can be described as the people who know the least when they only heard about some insights on a topic which they do not know anything about. They believe that they know the most about it, even more than the experts. For example, they don't trust
Mm-hmm.
the doctors anymore because they read something on the internet that some medicine will lead to cure cancer instantly or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
There we can say the ego comes in the way, which hinders ourselves from being less wrong. This is also how knowledge grows. In science, which is progressing only by experiments where a theory which has to be formulated in a falsifiable manner so that you can really test it is tried to be proven wrong. So if you try to prove wrong a theory in science, then science progresses through the new insights you gain. This is also how modern teamwork can work, where you have transparency, where you can generate insights because of that, gain transparency, and then from the insights gain reflections where you can act in a different way and adapt it. So the only thing certain is that nothing is certain, Peyton.
Indeed, indeed. And then the last thing I'll mention on this is an irony of recognizing that nothing is certain, is that we will look around and see that a lot of people are acting like they are certain about things. A lot of people are using motivated reasoning. A lot of people are falling into the temptations of believing that they know all that there is to know, or confabulating reasons to support their emotions, pushing things forward with confirmation bias, and not having a rigorous, unbiased, untainted by ego thought process in the way they make their decisions. And there can be a temptation in order to, when we see this in our teams or in our whatever that we're doing, there can be a temptation actually to say that, oh, there needs to be a counterforce to this motivated reasoning over here, and fall into actually subtly and blindly some of the same traps when we see it over there. And so in those moments, it becomes, I would say, even more difficult, but yet still just as important to retain this balance on just falling into motivated reasoning, believing that we are certain, blinding ourselves to our own blind spots on one side because we see it on another side is not actually the ultimate good in those situations. It's actually trying to level up the ways of thinking, the ways of decision making, the approach to trying to prove ourselves wrong rather than trying to win, quote, making our case or whatever the case. And so this is a little bit of how do we say function or tai chi that we want to play in our teams and our inevitable disagreements that will come up. And of course, we too will make these mistakes from time to time. This is just natural human conditioned tendencies that we should forgive ourselves and others for occasionally falling into. But when we see them, we should watch out and be mindful of ourselves too. Am I just falling into the same errors in my approach to making important decisions that I see over there as a quote response, as an unconscious reaction to what I perceive over there? Am I actually jumping right into or being pulled right into the same mistakes? And so this is once again, this is a place that we must rely on awareness in our life. We must rely on awareness to see, am I doing the same thing? Am I acting like I'm certain when I'm not? Am I ignoring my blind spots? Or am I trying to open myself to all the information and genuinely, sincerely trying to be less wrong in an important decision? So these are many of my intentions for the week to come. How do I keep my own balance with decision making and recognize that I really don't know. I'm going to have blind spots. There's tons of information about how the world will change that isn't even available yet, even if I did have all the information available now. And I know damn well I don't have all the information that's already available. There's some things I'm not seeing. There's some subjects that I haven't really learned. There's some historical trends and the ways that these contexts and momentums and forces interact that I haven't run the math correctly on. There's tons of errors. And so really having this intention to be less wrong, to ask for my blind spots, to seek out the things that I need to learn in order to have a more balanced and nuanced approach to the circumstances and challenges that are before me. This is my intention for the week to come. How about you, my friend?
Well, may we realize that our biggest barriers is our blind spots and our ego, and may we accept that we absolutely know nothing. And with that, embrace reality as it is, as it comes, as it unfolds, And with that, let's embrace our ability to adapt and evolve with that.
Agreed. Agreed. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, my friend.
Thank you for sharing yours as well, my friend.
I am certain that nothing is certain. I will talk to you on the next one.
Yeah, man. Talk to you soon.